So today we have Alyssa Stefanson with us, and Alyssa is a trauma-informed holistic health coach and somatic practitioner on a mission to help others enhance their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual wellness by reconnecting to the innate wisdom of their body. Alyssa has over 12 years experience as a coach in the health and wellness industry. She started off her career in fitness, which we both have been there, then became a certified holistic health coach and is trained in somatic breathwork and somatic attachment therapy. She believes a holistic approach to treating trauma is necessary. Those who have experienced trauma often don't realize the intense grip it can have over their life. Alyssa has her own personal breakdown to a breakthrough story that led her on down this path and why she is so passionate about helping others to heal. She creates a safe container to be seen, held, and supported in order to reconnect with the deep, well, probably connect and reconnect with the deep wisdom and innate healing capacities of the body to triumph over trauma. Thank you for coming on today. Hi, Alyssa.
Thank you so much for having me. I was excited to be here.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
You have a green plant behind you. So I'm thinking you've got some green. You're good. You're good. You're not going to get pinched. Good thing. Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation today. And so I guess we can kind of just first, tell us about your journey and how you really got to this point where you are today.
Yeah. Okay. So where to even start? So I'll start with my childhood. I'll go quickly over that, but I really struggled most of my life with extreme social anxiety, to the point where I couldn't even speak in public as a child. Which is bizarre now because I have absolutely no problem in public. But yeah, as a child, I could not speak in public. And in high school, I started getting into drugs and alcohol at a young age. It helped me become more outgoing, helped me connect and make friends. And then by the age of 16 years old, I was addicted to cocaine. Oh, wow. I was hanging out with a very dangerous, bad crowd. I was involved with a lot of criminal activity. I started dating a cocaine dealer at a young age. And it was kind of all downhill from there. So for 3 years, I was heavily addicted to cocaine. I was using every single day. I lost a lot of people during that time to either homicide, suicide, drug overdoses, or car accidents. And then I ended up losing my best friend who died in a car accident as well. So at the age of 20, I ended up leaving that relationship right after my best friend had passed away. And shortly after I found out, I did get into a brief short relationship. And shortly after I found out I was pregnant. So I was on my own. I was single on my own, having a baby, but that's how I got sober at first. So I got clean off drugs. I had my daughter, and I really got into fitness and nutrition and personal development and all the mindset stuff, which was great. It got me to a certain point in my life, but I did not do any of the trauma work. And I had a lot of trauma. But I didn't even want to look at that. I couldn't, I just suppressed it all. Right. So what happened was I kept repeating the same patterns over. I kept attracting the same partners into my life, just different face, but same person. Right. And so it just kept repeating. So then in my late 20s, I got into a relationship with a man who was very violent. He actually he struggled with PTSD. He did 2 tours in Afghanistan. Oh, wow. So when he drank, he would go into complete psychosis, and it was very dangerous. A lot of times there was guns and weapons involved. So during this time, I started coping with alcohol to the point where I had to have alcohol in my system 24/7. Wow. I was outside the LC at 10 a.m. every single day. It just took complete control of my life. I was drunk at work. I was hiding it in my purse. I was hiding it around the house. I had absolutely no control over it. Until finally, at the time, it seemed like a bad thing, but it actually was a good thing. I ended up having a bad fall, and I broke my right tib and fib, and I sprained my left ankle. And so I ended up being in a wheelchair for over a month. And during that time, the abuse escalated to the point where it actually took me to that point to realize that I was being abused, because I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't even defend myself. So I knew I just needed to leave that relationship. So as soon as I got out of the wheelchair, I decided to leave. I was having a nervous breakdown. I was at rock bottom, and I knew I needed to get sober. So I left that relationship and I moved into an apartment with my daughter with literally no belongings. We had no furniture. nothing. And then a few weeks later, I lost my job.
Mm.
And that was like my complete rock bottom. That was what I needed to experience to get me on the right path. Because after that, shortly after that, I got sober, completely turned my life around, really got back into all the personal development stuff, joined a 12-step program. But this time I knew I needed to focus on the trauma. And I was starting to experience a lot of psychosomatic symptoms. I was experiencing extreme migraine headaches, TMJ. I was unable to sleep, like insomnia, just chronic pain. My hair was falling out, just a lot of issues. So I really focused first on getting my health back nutrition wise. And that really, really helped. But I knew that there was a missing piece. And so finally, I came across the work of Peter Levine, which we'll get more into in this episode. But he is the founder of somatic experiencing. So I was introduced to somatic work and how we store trauma in our body. And so it was when I started to actually dive into that I started to notice like profound shifts in my life, and my healing basically accelerated. And it's changed my life to the point where that's what I'm doing now. It's a calling, it's a passion, it's something that I'm meant to do in my life so much. So
I love that. And so first off, I want to say it's interesting how we can tend to date the same person, because I want to say that little tidbit, because I've had, over the course of my life, the exact same character shows up, right? And it's so funny as you get older, because you recognize it faster. Like you go from taking a couple years to recognizing it to a couple weeks, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, it's my dad again. Like it's the same dynamic. Not necessarily my dad, but it's that dynamic of love, because that's the example that you had, right? So it's so fascinating how that shows up, and quicker and faster. And so thank God you're able to have some self-realization and go, wait a second, okay, this is the exact same pattern again, right? So I just wanted to kind of bring attention to that, because I think that's something hopefully people can really bring awareness to the people they bring into their lives and what that lesson is for them. Otherwise, you're going to keep bringing the exact same situation until you stop and go, wait a second, I'm the common denominator. What's going on here with this, right? And how am I going to choose differently, right? So I just want to bring attention to that, because it kind of like rang for me, especially being single. So it's funny when you meet people, you're like, no, and getting better at doing that. So anyways, but can you explain what the difference is between somatic breath work and somatic, messing those words up, somatic, I can say that, attachment therapy. So what is the difference between those two?
yeah. Okay. So let's first get into somatic, what that is. So soma is Greek. It's relating to the body.
Gotcha.
So let's first talk about somatic breath work. So somatic breath work it's an embodiment experience. So what it is it's a guided breath work session with vocal cueing, rhythmic music, and it kind of helps evoke emotion and helps us express emotion in different ways, whether that's expressing it with our voice, with our body, like through sound, through movement, yelling, it could be laughing, it could be crying. So yeah, it's a breathwork session that's guided, but it's meant to be done with a practitioner, with someone, because we heal in the presence of an empathetic witness.
Is this different then? Because there's a lot of, with William Hoff and all his breathwork stuff. Is this a very different, or is there a little bit of connection between what he does and between what the somatic breathwork is?
So they're very, very different.
Okay, gotcha.
Wim Hof is great. Like Wim Hof would be, I believe it's shorter durations, where like somatic breath work. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of holotropic breath work.
No.
So I'll explain that first. That was my first introduction to like a really like cathartic release through breath work, but it's intense. So holotropic is like the traditional holotropic is, I believe, 3 hours long. I went to one that was 2 hours long, the first time I've ever done it. And it was the most intense experience of my entire life. Wow. So what happens is you do deep belly breathing for like 2 hours. So it's like clearing, right? And you get,
so you're laying down. Are you laying down at this point? And you're kind of in a relaxed state. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And you get fully out of your head into your body, and you're with a group of people. Yeah. And there was two practitioners going around the room, and they're there for support and they're guiding you. And so what happened was all of a sudden my body just took over, and I went through like this full cathartic release where like my body was just like making all these movements. I started experiencing all of these emotions, like these really intense emotions. I experienced grief, I experienced shame, I experienced anger. Then all of a sudden, I just felt like bliss. I felt my heart crack open. Like it was the most intense experience of my life. After that, the integration process was pretty intense for me because, and we'll kind of get into this, how this like, so my nervous system, because of the trauma that I had experienced, my nervous system was stuck in like a state of like a shutdown response, which is called dorsal. If you've heard of like the polyvagal theory,
Is that one of the most common? People shut down? Is there a more common one than other, or?
Yeah, so I'll kind of explain how the ladder goes. So ventral is like our core state. So that is where, like, that is our natural state. This is our true authentic self. We can look at this as like our soul, our higher self. This is when we are connected, we're in flow. It's our social engagement system. We are moving at a good pace. We're calm, we're curious, we're compassionate, we're connected, we're confident. It's a place where we want to be. We're in flow, right? Like life is good. So when something traumatic happens or like chronic stress, we start to go into sympathetic. So sympathetic would be more of like a hypervigilant, anxiety, like
flight or flight, cortisol.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but then we kind of move down like the ladder. So if you are unable to fight or like flee that situation, your body would actually go into like an immobility response. So you would shut down, which is a good thing. It's your nervous system protecting you, right? So you shut down, but the problem is we can actually get stuck in those states. And there's also a blended state called freeze, which is a blend of sympathetic and a blend of dorsal. So dorsal is more of like our shutdown, really depressed, low energy, like what's the point of life, can't move forward. That's how we feel when we're stuck in that state. Freeze would be like a blend. So freeze would be like, think of it like you're driving a car and you have one foot on the accelerator, one foot on the brake. Like you have all that sympathetic charge, all that anxiety inside you, but you can't move forward. You just feel stuck. Yeah. And we fluctuate throughout the day. Like we go to different states, like different things trigger these states for us too, right? Like if you're ever really overwhelmed, like when I'm overwhelmed, if I've taken on too much, I go into freeze. Where it's like, I
just don't want to do anything. Just like, my list seems way too overwhelming.
Yeah. So that's what that looks like. So much of my life, I was really stuck in that dorsal state. Like I was really just low energy, depressed, disconnected. I was very dissociated, very disconnected from my body. And what happened in that breathwork session was like, all of a sudden I shifted out of that, but I accessed all of this sympathetic energy all of a sudden. So for a couple of months, I had a lot of anxiety. But I knew enough that I needed to go see a somatic therapist. So I work with a somatic therapist and I was able to co-regulate with her. So, but the thing is, a lot of people wouldn't know that. And that's why somatic release breathwork is different, where it's more gentler.
Gotcha.
Because there's medicine in gentleness. It doesn't have to be that intense. Like holotropic breathwork is intense. So what somatic release is it is 30 minutes of that clearing, but we do 3 breath holds in between. So every 10 minutes you do a breath hold where you're connecting to something greater. And then the last 30 minutes, we're actually focusing on what we want to bring in, like kind of Joe Dispenza style, like shifting your state. What do you want to bring in? And it's nostril breathing. So it's like you're calming down, you're regulating your nervous system. So it's not as intense, but it's just as powerful. And what I have found is that there is way more medicine in gentleness than like these really intense experiences that we often think that we need, right? Like we often just want to throw the kitchen sink at people, but like gentleness is often more effective because sometimes these intense experiences can actually set us back. So that is what somatic breath work is. So somatic attachment therapy, and we actually were talking about it. So we talked about what somatic means. So soma is the body. Attachment is how we connect and how we bond. So we all know, I'm sure a lot of us have heard, because it's pretty popular right now, anxious and avoidant attachment, right? Yeah. So that is basically what we go into, but it's all about separation from ourselves, from our own bodies, right? Like it's coming back to that secure place within ourselves. and learning how to, like, really, when we want to heal our attachment wounds, and we do this in relationship, right? Like, we can become aware of our attachment wounds. That's why we're talking about how, like, why do I keep attracting the same partners? I'm aware of it, but I keep attracting the same people into my life. Well, it's an embodied experience, right? And we heal in relationship. So it's like learning, and this was life-changing for me. It was like learning, like, this is actually a body experience that I'm going through. Like, this is all happening in my body. And the majority of my life, I was so disconnected from my body, I didn't even realize it. So it's like when that partner, when I'm with someone, like if I'm dating someone, if I start actually observing what's going on in my body, then I start to experience that push and that pull. Like for me, I have a disorganized attachment, which is like a mix of the anxious and avoidant. So it's like, I feel like that inside my body, like this anxiousness, and then this like pushing them away, right? So it's all happening inside our bodies. So when we learn these different somatic tools that we can actually use to be able to sit with our heavy emotions, and we want to show our nervous system that it's safe. So that's what somatic attachment therapy is. So I actually work one-on-one with clients through this, through different somatic practices, which what somatic practices would be. So Peter Levine, who's the founder of Somatic Experiencing, he has all these different tools. So I actually do this with my clients, and it's profound, the shifts that they have that happen in these sessions. And it's very, very gentle. Like we just do some talk therapy, and I guide them into their bodies, and we do some of these practices, and so much comes up. And it's called a bottom-up approach, right? Like we need both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So the bottom-up approach is we focus on the sensations, the felt sensations of the body and the emotions in the body. And we focus there. And what happens often is like, they'll have a complete shift in perception if they allow themselves to process their emotions. So like my approach, and my clients always laugh because they're like, this is the total opposite of what we were expecting. Because I get them to go into their emotions. If they're telling me that they're pissed off, I'm like, good, go into it. Like I want them to fully express that and feel safe. And when they're able to fully express that, all of a sudden they have a shift in awareness, a shift in consciousness, and they're able to see the whole scenario from a completely different lens, like they see it in a different light. So yeah, so that's the type of work that I do, and the difference between somatic breath work and somatic attachment therapy.
So would somebody work, like you do both, obviously. So if I'm coming to you, would you have somebody work with you on breath, or would you do breath work first, so you kind of have an understanding, and then also combine that with the attachment therapy? Or do you have just one, or just I guess it's probably good one or the other, but this probably works really well together, right? Because you're able to release, and then you're able to work through what you're releasing and have somebody coach you through it at the same time. Is that?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I always recommend doing both. I always recommend starting with just the 1 hour somatic attachment therapy because it's gentler. And not everyone's ready for the breath work. Like not everyone feels that they need that. And that's totally fine. That's totally okay. Because it's a very powerful experience. But for someone who does want to do breath work, I usually say, okay, let's start with the somatic attachment therapy first. Let's do a session of that. Then we'll do breath work, but we're going to need the integration process after. So then I always recommend doing the 1 hour somatic attachment therapy so we can talk about their experience and then fully process it in the body.
And so you're saying, so there is breath work, and there's also talking, and those are some of the forms of somatic, right? Of somatic therapy. So what are there other ones as well? I think you kind of mentioned that. So are there many, or are there just these two?
There's so many.
Yeah. What are some of the examples?
So I'll kind of give you some examples. So Peter Levine, so he's the founder of Somatic Experiencing. So I'll give you some examples of the tools that he does. So there's one, and this is probably one of like the most popular, it's called pendulation. So what you do, and anyone could do this on their own at home, is focus on an area in your body that you feel constriction. And I recommend doing this if you're ever anxious. So if you're feeling like a lot of anxiety coming on, find the area in your body that you feel the anxiety. So say you feel it in your chest, or you can feel it in your stomach, focus there, sit with it. And then you want to find an area in your body that's completely neutral. So say it's like your back. So then you can pendulate, you focus on your chest first, and then you focus on the area of your back, say for about 90 seconds each time. And then you go back and forth, and you'll find that the anxiety starts to dissipate. So that's one exercise. Another one is orienting to your space. So just, just sitting, like really relaxing yourself into your chair, really focusing on feeling the felt sensations of your legs, your back against the chair, and just letting your eyes gaze around the room. And it's really helpful if you see something that like brings you joy in the room. Like for me, I always I notice my bike and it gives me a sense of freedom. So then I'll really focus on that feeling of the bike and like it's expanding back into me. So that's another exercise. And there's quite a few different ones. There's grounding. There is focusing on our body boundaries. A lot of times when I'm guiding clients through sessions, we'll focus on their body boundaries and they'll see things like, they'll get visions. They'll see things like energy moving through their hands.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So there's multiple different ones.
Well, I was watching a couple of the videos and they, in breath work, and there, as you kind of mentioned before, there's an array of emotions. And is that the trauma, I guess, escaping your body, or is that just, can you explain a little bit about why you would express yourself in crying, or would just because you feel the release? Is that kind of what's going on? Or is it because you're connecting so much with that trauma in that moment? I mean, these are probably maybe all examples, but connecting so much of the trauma in the moment, and maybe you're really experiencing something that you kind of hid for so long, right? And then all of a sudden it's showing up and you're like, oh my God, that's what I've been XYZ upset about for all these years, right? So is that, I don't know if I just answered my own question. I might have just done that.
I'll go into that because we are so disconnected from our bodies, like so disconnected from our bodies. You don't even actually realize it until you actually start doing these practices. Like I had thought that I had done so much inner work until I finally realized one day that how disconnected I was from my body. And I found that out because I had a hard time being around people. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even realize it at first. And I'm like, why can't I form intimate relationships? Like, why can't I let people in? I'm always wanting to just like leave. Like when I'm around people, I can't be there for long periods of time. And then I started paying attention. I'm like, holy, I'm not even in my body. Like I'm so dissociated. So, and a lot of people are, a lot of us don't even realize that. Like, do you ever drive and like realize and think like, how did I get there?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm always driving. So everybody be very fearful. That's why no idea how I get most places. No, I definitely, cause I get in my head and I start thinking about air and wellness or whatever it is. And then, and then I arrive and I'm like, oh my God, we're here in one piece.
We're always in our heads and we're just so disconnected. And I remember even driving one day, I ended up getting this so bad. I got 3 speeding tickets in one day. I'm like, I don't even remember speeding, but I was so dissociated and disconnected from my body. So when I started actually just coming back into my body, it's like, there's a lot of emotions and sensations there that we don't even realize because we're so disconnected from. So somatic breath work really helps us get back into our bodies. And it's surprising how like breath work just starts to bring up these emotions. And it's a combination of being, so like if you're doing it in a group of people and one person starts to express, you feel safe to express. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like just that, it's something about the community too, right? Like healing in community, but people still have these profound releases one-on-one. Like I still work with people one-on-one if they don't feel safe yet to do that in the community, they're still going to have that profound release because they have an empathetic witness. And the empathetic witness is everything. Mm-hmm. Because trauma is anything that happens too much, too soon, too fast for our nervous system to handle without the presence of an empathetic witness. So we become traumatized when we didn't have an empathetic witness there present with us. So that's how we heal. So that's why people are very fascinated when we start to do this work, because they're like, well, I always meditate and I do these practices on my own, but I haven't been able to bring myself to have these experiences. And it's like, because you have that person there with you to help you co-regulate, and that creates that safe space for you to express and for you to be accepted for all parts of you, for all emotions that want to come up. And it's a question, because I mean, I've read, Gabriel Mate's book. I always don't say his name correctly, but, and it's his work is fantastic. I completely agree with what he talks about in the sense of trauma and looking at addiction, as we're kind of talking about today. And one of the things I'm hoping that happens in the future is when you go to your doctor and you have even a physical issue, right? Aside from mental health issue, but a physical issue, that there's more of a conversation about what happened to you
in your childhood would happen is there, and working with somebody like yourself or having this somatic therapy that's in combination with addiction, in combination with healing physical ailments as well. Because I mean, to me, it's just so obvious that there's a connection between the trauma we've gone through, the things we're holding in, and even in, in utero, right? When if your mom was super stressed during your pregnancy, and cortisol levels through the roof, and then you wonder why you have kids who are anxious or kids who are, and I truly believe that is all connected. I mean, there's scientific research to back it too. So it's going to be really interesting to see in the next, hopefully by the time my daughter becomes older, there is much more of a connection between all of this, in the sense of doctors and counselors and therapists all kind of working within and using therapy treatments, like somatic therapy treatments, to connect with the issues that are going on, and looking at ways in which to heal from not only just, take an antidepressant, but hold on, let's dig a little deeper here. What's going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right?
We're actually in a really exciting time.
Yeah.
And yeah, like how you're talking about how like even transgenerational trauma, like that's a huge,
100%.
huge
Huge
piece.
piece.
We now know now, like with the studies like of transgenerational, like with epigenetics, right?
Yes, 100%.
So we are in an exciting time where this is starting to be like trauma is being talked about way more than it was, right? So there's a lot of focus on it now. So that's exciting to see that people are starting to really realize that.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and hopefully we do have a point where, where it is. I mean, even it's common as going to the doctor and having it covered as well. Like that would be the ultimate goal, right? That would be the real ultimate goal. So just as you're going to see your doctor can say, hey, I think instead of going to get an MRI, maybe let's go do some therapy work and see what we can kind of uncover and work through there. Because I think that would really help a lot of people, instead of staying the exact same patterns that they're doing, be able to step outside and have a self-reflective look of what's going on, and then change it for their future generations going forward. I'm really lucky. I have a great mom who's a counselor and who's very well read. And we've worked through a lot of my stuff when it comes to my eating disorder and just all of that. We wrote the book together. And so we had a real opportunity to sit down and kind of and hash a lot of that out and have a lot of self-reflections of stuff I went through as a child, and her being able to acknowledge that, which was a big part of my healing, having somebody kind of, as you said, somebody there witnessing, but somebody there witnessing who was there when you were little saying that wasn't okay. And I'm so sorry. And so that was a big shift for me working through that. But having that has been, I think, essential in my own personal development and self-reflection and growth as well. However, that being said, I do want to try some breath work. I think it would actually be really good to try some of this. I think there's always something you can uncover, right?
Absolutely.
And so can I ask, why do you think it releases trauma? So is it just the breathing and connection to body? That's really what it does. It's like, why do they think the trauma gets released from that?
So we'll get into how trauma is first stored in the body.
Okay. All right.
So, and I so recommend anyone listening, read the book, Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine.
Okay. We'll put that in the link.
Yeah. So Peter Levine, he's a neurobiologist. He is the founder of somatic experiencing. He's been doing this work for over 40 years. Like it's very credible. It's actually starting, like these are science-backed somatic tools. A lot of therapists and psychologists are actually starting to use this and getting trained in this in their practices, which is great. It's fantastic to see. So what he found, he actually observed animals in the wild, because we are animals. And he saw that because he figured, he's like, hey, animals deal with threat on a daily basis. They're always like in danger, but if they were traumatized, they wouldn't survive, right? Like they wouldn't be able to go back to like the herd and live and keep going, right? So he gave an example of a herd of impala. So there was a herd of impala grazing, and then a lioness actually came and started chasing them. And so they took off, and they take off at like a super high speed. I don't remember the speed exactly, but that's their fight and flight response. So there's all that sympathetic energy in the body. So they're taking off. And then one of the impala, it wasn't able to escape. So what happens is it drops to the ground. It goes into that immobility response. It plays dead, right? So then the lioness drags it. And often what happens is the lioness will actually leave it there and go get its cubs, so it can show the cubs how to kill it. Oh. So remember, all of that sympathetic energy was in that impala. all of a sudden it dropped into immobility. So it had all of that energy in its body. So what happens is the lioness goes to get its cubs and the impala comes out of that response. So and I should say, first of all, when they go into the immobility, what happens often is like in the Eastern cultures, they would say that their soul fragments off. We would call this dissociation. Like a part of the consciousness actually leaves the body to protect it. This is a good thing.
Interesting.
This is like, you know why if we're in a car accident or if we've experienced extreme abuse as a child, we often don't remember that because we dissociate from our body. It's actually a protective mechanism. It's a good thing. But what happens though with animals is when they come out of that response, they shake. So they shake, they finish that energy discharge cycle, and then they go back to the herd and move on, right? Because they've been able to finish that process. We as humans don't finish that energy discharge cycle. We don't shake because it's not culturally accepted, right?
Well, just like,
right?
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Shaking it off. That's why that song was written. There we go. There we go. Shake it off. Okay, go ahead.
Exactly. So we don't finish that energy discharge cycle because it's not socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that consciousness, like that part of our consciousness that dissociation fragments off, doesn't come back right away. That's why we experience dissociation. And so anyways, we have all that trapped energy inside our body. Like imagine when you're hit from behind in a car, like you're in a car accident. You have like all that energy, like your shoulders hunch over, all that energy trapped inside your body, and you don't actually release it. So that's how like that trauma gets stored, like in our nervous system, right? And somatic breath work is actually like it resets your nervous system. It regulates your nervous system, right? So that is actually how we're actually releasing that trauma. And that's why a lot of people during breath work or through somatic experiencing, so through somatic experiencing exercises, they shake too. Like often people will start just doing these simple exercises will all of a sudden feel the need to shake and move their body. Like they need to like get that energy out of their body. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So is there something you could do if, you know, you're an adult, let's say you're an adult experiencing trauma, because as a child, that's obviously a different situation. Would you just randomly shake your body? Was that what you would like? Like, so now if you had a traumatic experience, would you literally just start shaking just to kind of get rid of it? Would that be recommended?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Peter Levine wrote a second book. I think he has multiple books, but there's one, I think it's The Unspoken Voice. And it's so fascinating because he had already been doing like years and years, like decades of this like research. And he actually was in a very bad accident. He was hit by a car. And he was actually able to like practice his own process. Like he had an empathetic witness there with him. So he practiced connecting with her. Like he was fully like aware of all of this stuff. He let his body shake, like go through that process. And so by the end of it, like he had to go to the hospital. I can't remember whether he had to have surgery or not, but anyways, he practiced his own process and he
how fascinating
after. Yeah. So I recommend reading those books.
Yeah.
And there's things that we can do too, just learning from that of what to do if we see someone who's just experienced some sort of trauma, how we can be there for them. Like our society doesn't even know how to deal with these things.
No,
like one of the reasons that like there's such a mental health crisis is we live in such an emotionally phobic and touch phobic culture. And we do not know how to be there for people. And there's nothing wrong, like it's not our fault, right? It's our culture. But we don't actually know how to be there for emotional support for other people.
I also think too I'm not sure the Americans, but I think also in Canada, there tends to be a little bit more of a, standoffishness. I know we're Norwegian, British, that's my descent is at least. And I know my mom took a really long time to be able to hug. My mom's always been very much like, when she hugs us, it's like this space. And there's just kind of more this distance coldness. And if you look about, back on homesteading day, like nobody was huggy and loving. And, there wasn't that kind of thing that you had when you look at a lot of other cultures where they tend to be very affectionate and very loving. So I wonder if is there research showing different countries having different levels of, that would be interesting to see too. Like if other countries deal with their trauma a little better and because they're more supportive and empathetic to one another, and if they're able to work through stuff, and we're maybe us over here are a little bit more devoid of it. I don't know.
Well, I know for sure that a lot of like the work with this somatic therapy work and attachment therapy, they take a lot of what the Eastern cultures are doing. And now we actually have like scientific evidence of it, right? Because a lot of them, like they healed in community.
Yeah.
Right. Like if someone was traumatized, they would actually all come together in community. And like grief was seen as a highly revered time because it was a time of transition. They even looked at trauma differently. Like trauma isn't a bad thing. Trauma is actually a catalyst for profound spiritual growth.
Yeah.
Like it's the way that we look at it too. We have such a fear of it, right? We also have such a fear of death.
Yeah.
Where it's like they look at death differently.
We do not know how to and work through death. My brother's a prof over in Thailand, and his girlfriend's sister recently passed very fast. And they spent, I think they had a week they spent in the temple. He said and my brother has his PhD in postmodern religious studies. So he knows religion very well. And he said, here in North America, Western culture, we don't deal with death. We go to the church. We're there for a couple hours, and it's like, all right, well, see you later, figure it out, take care of yourself, right? Work through your grief. And he said there it was such a different experience because the whole family comes in, they all stay in the temple, they're there together. And he said, because I asked him at Christmas, I'm like, how are they dealing not having her there at Christmas? Is it really tough? And he said, no, he goes, because they deal with it differently. He goes, it's not like, oh, this is the first Christmas without her. Like, that's not the way they look at things. They had an opportunity. They celebrated her life. They were there. He said, it's a very different way of working through death. He goes, and it's so much more healthier than the way we do. He goes, because you're able to really process it. It's not this kind of, fast food kind of idea where it's like, hey, well, you're done now, it's over. And so go figure it out and grieve on your own. And so I thought that was so fascinating to look at how we need to shift that as well, right? Not even trauma, that's one thing, but also this way in which we deal with these experiences that are traumatic. Obviously, grief and losing somebody can be a very traumatic experience if you're not supported in a correct way.
Absolutely. And we're communal beings. Like we're meant to be in community.
Yeah.
So separate from that.
Well, and so is there anybody who should not use this type of therapy? Like, because this all sounds obviously amazing. So, I mean, I know I want to go sign up for some breath work. And if you lived closer, I'd, make a session with you, but.
So there's definitely certain people who shouldn't. So if you're pregnant, not recommended.
Yeah.
Anyone with cardiovascular disease, anyone with high blood pressure, glaucoma, retinal detachment, osteoporosis, any recent physical injuries or like surgery is actually really great for people with injuries, but once they're in that rehabilitation phase. And then anyone with any severe psychiatric conditions, major medications, and a history of seizures, epilepsy.
Yeah. Okay.
But not. Yeah.
And it's so, and there's places you can go to all over Canada and obviously North America as well, right? So you basically just kind of Google your local place and then you can, and looking for somebody who kind of uses does everybody use Peter Levine's methodology, or is it, that's where you kind of want to look for because he seems to be like the godfather of somatic therapy, right?
I would look for, so you can look up somatic experiencing practitioners. There's not a whole lot of them, but even look up, like I have an amazing somatic therapist that I go see. She's a holistic.
Oh, so you have one too. So you have one and then you also that. Well, I guess so. Yeah, that makes sense.
So she is actually a clinical counselor, but she's trained in
that's amazing.
Unbelievable.
That is amazing.
Can find them. So you definitely can find them. I would recommend. Finding someone who's had training in somatic experiencing. They don't necessarily have to be a somatic practitioner. Like I've had training in somatic experiencing, but I'm not an actual practitioner. I haven't taken the whole, it's the 3-year schooling. I haven't taken that yet. But I would recommend looking into that. And then for somatic breath work, I'm a somatic release practitioner. So there's 700 worldwide now. They actually just started this 2 years ago. And it's just started to explode. So now they have 700 practitioners worldwide. But yeah, if you look into breathwork is starting to grow rapidly. They're saying breathwork is where yoga was at 20 years ago.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So we'll see a lot of growth in that too.
Well, and then maybe there'll be, and that would actually make sense if you think about it, places where instead of going to do yoga, you could go on, Saturday mornings and do some breath work and do some release of all the stress that you've had happen during the week, which would help with your cortisol, which would help with your hormones, which would help and so on and so on and so on and so on. Right. There you
Absolutely.
go. That's actually that would be really interesting to have that kind of thing available where you can go any day of the week and just go in, pop in for a, 45 minute to an hour session. That's it's a good business idea. I think you need to jump on that.
Totally. I actually do have a place here. I'm starting it in Winnipeg.
Are you? There we go.
Yeah.
And so how do people find that? What is your, is it?
Finding me on Instagram is probably the best place right now.
Okay.
I don't have that listed on a website yet, but if they, if you put my Instagram handle in the show notes, they can reach out.
Yes, I will for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then when I come to Winnipeg, I hope it's open by then and I would love to come. So I'm going to do some personal questions now. Was there anything else that I didn't touch on that you wanted to share about somatic? Do we kind of get the gist? I want to make sure, because I love this conversation. So where do you see yourself in 5 years? These are my personal fun questions.
Well, definitely I want to be working with like large groups of people doing somatic breath work.
Yeah.
Definitely getting deeper into this practice. I'm constantly educating myself, learning more. It's an exciting time because it's growing.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm right now just kind of in that, it's just in that beginning phase. Like I'm excited to see where it's at in 5 years from now.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I feel this way kind of about Aaron Wellness. I feel like I'm on the roller coaster and I'm going up and it's like, tick, 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 and I'm kind of like, oh, that's what I kind of feel like sometimes. What is one thing you would tell your 20-year-old self?
Oh, wow. I was so anxious about the future all the time. Mm-hmm. And I would tell her what's meant for you will not pass you by. Mm-hmm. And don't worry about the external, just focus on the internal, that relationship with yourself, and then it'll all fall into place.
Yeah, I love that. And last question, what inspires you?
Watching other people's healing transformation. Like, I can't tell you like how inspiring it is to watch someone like their entire perception of reality shift just by working with the felt sensations of the body. And like, I get to just be there as a guide and a witness for it. And it's just such an honor. And I'm just so honored and humbled by this work to be able to witness other people's transformation. It's so inspiring.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about this. I'm definitely going to look into this. I think it's something everybody obviously can use. And another question, can children do this too, or is it just adults? Is there an age for it? I never asked that question.
So for breath work, definitely not recommended under 18, just because of the cathartic release. The somatic exercises, they're very gentle. Absolutely, they can. Anyone can even look up these somatic experiencing exercises online. Like you'll find them everywhere. These different tools that you can use with your kids.
Okay, awesome. And so everybody can find you on Instagram. That's where they find you now. Okay, so I'll put your Instagram handle and everything into the post and people can watch you there. And then you also have a podcast as well. What's the name of the podcast?
Awaken with Alyssa podcast.
There we go. So definitely go tune in and subscribe to that. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing this with me and having this conversation. This has been absolutely fantastic. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking with you.
Great. And everybody else, stay tuned. Next month, we're going to have another Friends You Keep. And thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you all have a blessed, amazing day and that you're all stepping into who you are supposed to be in this world, because that's what this is all about, is fully becoming your best possible self. So there we go. Thank you. Bye.